The Mysterious Sores. In about 1940, my Aunt Rosaria, a robust woman shining with health, developed sores which in time grew bigger and more purulent, although she felt no pain. Two big sores in particular, like two large swollen boils, were visible under her chin. These boils secreted pus almost all the time, and a few drops even fell onto her plate while we were having lunch. I felt a sense of disgust during these unpleasant situations and tried to keep away from the table. But my mother, in order not to aggravate the embarrassment this caused us, would restrain me with her hand and, from time to time, pinch me. Aunt Rosaria, as a co-owner of the family possessions, often came home for meals. Her sores, which spread all over her body, especially on her breast and shoulders, were lovingly disinfected by my mother, who urged her to go to Bari to see a specialist. But one day my aunt sat down to eat completely cured. In fact, there were small scars where the sores had been. No one made any comment. Only when my aunt was leaving did my father retort, remembering previous and new episodes. Ched fam si fiat, vedia kosnav. That woman has always made us see new things, referring to Luisa. My father also had a great devotion for Luisa the saint, and on his deathbed he wanted to clasp her nightdress to his breast. My mother was wearing the same nightdress at the time of her own departure for heaven. But what happened to my aunt? This is her account of what occurred, given during one of the visits I regularly paid her when I was curate at the friary of Barletta. My aunt, urged by my mother, consulted a dermatologist in Bari. The diagnosis was terrible. "Dear lady," the doctor said to her, "these are cancerous sores, which will spread increasingly over your whole body. You have a form of leprosy, a very rare disease." Just imagine my aunt's state of mind on hearing these words. After wandering about in Bari for several hours, in the evening she returned to Luisa's house. Aunt Rosaria gave vent to her feelings with the servant of God, and said to her with irritation, "I'm with you all the time, and yet do you allow certain things? I have no children to take care of me." Luisa let her speak, and then said to her, "Rosaria, Rosaria, you have gone round to all these doctors, and you have neglected the one true doctor." On hearing these words, my aunt immediately took all the medicines, gauze, and cotton wool, and flung them away from the balcony. Then she said, "I now entrust myself to our Lord and to your prayers." Before she went to bed, Luisa called her, made her kneel beside her bed, and together they spent a long time praying. My aunt then went to bed. She slept in a double bed beside Angelina. That night, Aunt Rosaria felt her body flooded with a sense of well-being. When she rose the next morning, she found that all her sores had dried up. They were covered only by a thin scabs which came off during the day. She was perfectly cured. Rumors of the miracle spread, but no one dared to speak of it openly, although everyone knew that Luisa had had a hand in it. The reason for this was that Luisa did not want these phenomena to be attributed to her. "I cannot work miracles. It is our Lord who does them," she asserted. This is why no extraordinary episode that occurred through her intervention was made public. All the same, news of such matters spread in silence. Saint Padre Pio, Luisa Piccarreta, and Rosaria Bucci. Luisa Piccarreta and Saint Padre Pio of Petrocini knew one another for some time without ever having met, for Luisa was always confined to the bed where she sat, while Padre Pio was enclosed in the friary of the Capuchin Fathers of San Giovanni Rotondo. One question naturally arises: how did they come to know one another? This is difficult to discover, yet one thing is certain, that the two did know and esteem one another. My aunt recounts how Luisa would speak with respect and veneration of the Blessed Father, describing him as a true man of God, who still had great suffering to face for the good of souls. In about 1930, a well-known figure arrived at Luisa's house, sent personally by Padre Pio. He was Federico Abrash, a convert of Padre Pio. Federico spoke at length with Luisa. What they said we are not given to know, but one thing is certain: Federico Abrash became an apostle of the divine will, and regularly visited Luisa, with whom he always had long conversations. When his little son received his first communion from Padre Pio's hands, he was also immediately taken to see Luisa, who, according to the story, foretold that he would become a priest. The small boy at that time is now a priest and works at the Congregation for Bishops in Rome. He is known by the name of Monsignor Pio Abrash. When Luisa was condemned by the Holy Office and her works put on the index, Padre Pio sent her this message through Federico Abrash: Dear Luisa, saints serve for the good of souls, but their suffering knows no bounds. At that time, Padre Pio was also in very great difficulties. Saint Padre Pio sent many people to Luisa Piccarreta, and would say to the people of Corrado who went to San Giovanni Rotondo, What have you come here for? You have Luisa, go to her. Padre Pio recommended to certain of his faithful that they open a spirituality center at San Giovanni Rotondo, inspired by the servant of God Luisa Piccarreta. Miss Adriana Pallotti is currently an heir to Padre Pio's wishes. She has opened a house of the divine will at San Giovanni Rotondo, keeping alive the torch lit by Padre Pio with Federico Abrash. Miss Adriana Pallotti says that it was Saint Padre Pio who encouraged her to spread Luisa Piccarreta's spirituality in San Giovanni Rotondo, and to help disseminate the divine will throughout the world, as Padre Pio desired. Aunt Rosaria went regularly to San Giovanni Rotondo, especially after Luisa's death. Padre Pio knew her very well, and when Luisa was still alive, he would ask Aunt Rosaria when he saw her, Rosa, how is Luisa? Aunt Rosario would answer him, She is well. After Luisa's death, Aunt Rosaria increased her visits to San Giovanni Rotondo in order to receive enlightenment and advice from Padre Pio. Aunt Rosaria was the one lamp that stayed alight to resolve Luisa Piccarreta's case regarding the sentence of the Holy Office, visiting various ecclesiastical figures, and, in addition, confronting the congregation of the Holy Office. Once she managed, it is not known how, to enter the office of the Cardinal Prefect Ottaviani, who heard her kindly and promised to take up the case. Indeed, a few days later, Aunt Rosaria was summoned by Archbishop Adesi of Trani, who said to her, "Miss Rosaria, I do not know whether to reprimand you or to admire you for your courage. You have faced the guard dog of the Church, the great defender of the faith, without being bitten." The conclusion was that permission was obtained to move Luisa's body from the cemetery to the church of Santa Maria Greco. Luisa said to my aunt, "You will be my witness," and one day Padre Pio told her point blank in his Benevento dialect, "Rosa, va nans, ca Luisa I granu mansare cendi Luisa," which is, "Rosaria, go ahead, for Luisa is great, and the world will be full of Luisa." My aunt often recounted this episode, but things were not going well. Everything indicated that Luisa would soon be forgotten. After the venerated Padre Pio's death, my aunt said one day, "Padre Pio prophesied that Luisa would be known throughout the world," and she repeated the phrase Padre Pio had said in his dialect. I answered that there would be no easy solution to the case of Luisa Piccarreta. Indeed, nothing further was said of it in Corrado either, and Padre Pio's words could have been considered merely a comforting remark. But Aunt Rosaria retorted, "No, during my confession, Padre Pio told me that Luisa is not of a human factor. She is a work of God, and He Himself will make her emerge. The world will be astounded at her greatness. Not many years will pass before this happens. The new millennium will see Luisa's light." I was silent at this assertion, and my aunt asked me, "But do you believe in Luisa?" I answered her that I did. Then she said to me, "Come to my house in a few days' time, because I have something very important to tell you." It was during the 70s, and Padre Pio had been dead for several years. Aunt Rosaria's Secret. In 1975, on February 2nd to be exact, I remember it was a very chilly day. My aunt summoned me to her house. She was very old and was beginning to have problems with her sight due to diabetes. My nephew and niece, Vincenzo and Sarah, went to her house to keep her company. That day, I found her sitting at the window as she recited the rosary. I sat down next to her, and having greeted her, asked her what it was she wanted to tell me that was so important. She looked at me and said, "What I am going to tell you now is of the utmost importance. Try to use it well, and I urge you to meditate on the miracles of the Lord who gave us Luisa, a precious creature in God's eyes and an instrument of His mercy. You would find it hard to discover such a precious, great soul. Luisa goes beyond herself, and you can only contemplate her fully in God's mystery. Mary was the one who brought redemption into the world with her fiat. That is why the Lord enriched her in such a wonderful way that she became a creature who was raised to the dignity of Mother of God. Mary is the Mother of God, and no other creature will ever equal her in greatness and power. After God, it is she alone who expresses the Lord's marvels to the world. After Our Lady comes Luisa, who brings the world the third fiat, the fiat of sanctification. She said this quietly, marking her words well, convinced of what she was asserting. I was overwhelmed by these assertions. That is why Luisa was always nailed to her bed, and every day offered to the divine majesty as a victim of expiation to God's most holy will. She continued, God was pleased with this creature, and so jealously guarded her that he removed her from human beings, entrusting her only to his church, so that she could preserve her and humanly forge her with infinite penances and misunderstandings. My Luisa knew no human consolations, but only divine ones. Her body was continually suspended between heaven and earth, and her earthly life was a continuous contradiction in comparison with normal human lives. Even in her body, she had to belong entirely to God. She then confided to me, one day the Lord said to Luisa, all those who have seen and know you will be saved. Dear Peppino, this is an extraordinary gift of God, and it has remained shrouded in silence because Luisa did not want knowledge of it broadcast, or she would have become the object of curiosity or veneration that, she said, she did not deserve. Except that one day her confessor told me that I could speak of it and spread it with discretion. Now I have told you, in the hope that you may be able to make good use of it. That day I was left enchanted by the language used by Aunt Rosaria, who expressed theological concepts perfectly, and even in a poetic vein. By accident, the notes I had made were lost, and I have limited myself to writing what I remember. Her death, almost unexpected, gave me no time to ask her further questions, which would have provided a clear explanation of what she had told me. Aunt Rosaria died in 1978.
End of chapter 3.